Hi everybody, this is Lindsay from windingroadcrochet.com and this is part 4 of the Desert Sunset Shawl video tutorial. We are continuing right where we left off and we are on row 34. To start row 34, you are going to chain 3 and then turn your work. So this is going to be another open stitch row. We'll start by working 2 double crochet into the very first stitch. Then we will chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work into the following stitch. And this is how we're going to start our repeat. We will repeat the chain 1, skip the chain space, double crochet into the next stitch. And that is your repeat. We'll chain 1 again, skip a chain space, double crochet into the next stitch, and just continue repeating this until you reach the chain 2 space in the center. So we've reached our last chain space. We're going to chain 1, work a double crochet into the following stitch, chain 1, and then start working directly into the chain 2 space where we'll work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet, chain 1, chain 2, and then 2 more double crochet. And as we go to work down the next side, we're going to chain 1, skip the first stitch, work into the next stitch, and then start a repeat of chain 1, skip the chain space, work into the next stitch. Again, chain 1, skip the chain space, and work into the next stitch. And repeat this until we're almost to the end of the row. So we've made it to the end of the row. We're going to chain 1, skip the last chain space, work into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the second to last stitch, and then work 2 double crochet into the very last stitch. 1 and 2, and that completes this row. So we're going to move on to the next row. We're going to start by chaining 3 and turn our work. You will work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch, and then 1 double crochet into the next stitch. And this is where we'll start a repeat, double crochet, chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the chain space, and work a double crochet into the next stitch. And just continue repeating this until you reach the chain 2 point in the center. So here we've made it to our last chain space. We'll chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet, chain 1, and skip the last double crochet before the chain 2 space. From here we'll work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into the chain 2 space at the point. And we'll work 2 more double crochet into that chain 2 space. Now on the other side, we will start with a chain 1, skip that first stitch, and work a double crochet into the second stitch, and then start a repeat of chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet into the next stitch, and just continue repeating this till we're almost at the end of this row. When you make it to your last chain space, you're going to chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet into the second to last stitch from the row, and then 2 double crochet into your very last stitch. And that completes this row. So now for the next row, we will chain 3, turn our work. We're working another row of this open stitch, so we're working 2 double crochet into the very first stitch, From here we will chain 1, skip the next stitch and work a double crochet into the following stitch. And then now we can start our repeat. Chain 1, skip the chain space, work a stitch into the double crochet of the last row, chain 1, skip the chain space, and work into the double crochet. And you'll just keep repeating this until you reach your chain 2 point. So we made it to the last chain space. We'll chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the last double crochet, working into the chain 2 stitch. We're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet, chain 1, chain 2, working on to the other side, 2 more double crochet. And that is our point. So moving along, we're going to chain 1, skip the first stitch, double crochet into the second stitch, and then back to our repeat. Chain 1, skip the chain space, double crochet into the next stitch. Again, we will chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet into the following stitch. Chain 1, skip space, double crochet into the following stitch, and just keep repeating this until you get close to the end of the row. We're working our last chain space, so we'll chain 1, skip the chain space, work a double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work 2 double crochet into the very last stitch of the row. And that row is completed. Chain 3 to start our next row and turn your work. And this is going to be a solid double crochet row, so we'll start with 2 double crochet into the first stitch, a double crochet into the next stitch, and then start our repeat of a double crochet in the chain space and a double crochet into the next stitch. And you'll simply repeat that until we reach the chain 2 point in the center. So double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet into the chain space, and just keep repeating. So we made it to our last chain space. We'll double crochet into this chain space, double crochet into the next 2 stitches, and then as we work into this chain 2 space, it will be 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet, chaining 1, chain 2, and then work 2 more double crochet, and that will give us our point. There we go. Now to work down the other side, we're going to double crochet into every stitch in every chain space, just like we did the other side. So double crochet into this chain space, double crochet into the next stitch, and then just keep repeating that until we're almost to the end of the row. So we're at the last chain space again. We'll double crochet into the chain space, double crochet into the next stitch, and then finish this row with 2 double crochet into the very last stitch. Now we're ready to tackle the next row. Chain 3 and turn your work. Our shawl is getting pretty big by this point. We're going to do 2 double crochet into the very first stitch, and this will also be a solid double crochet row, so we're going to double crochet in each stitch across until you reach the chain 2 corner. So we've made it to our corner. We're just going to double crochet into the last 2 stitches. As you can see, my yarn is changing colors again. This is kind of one of my favorite parts about a self-striping yarn. Working into the corner, we are going to do 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. Chain 1, chain 2, work 2 more double crochet. And there we have our corner. Now we're just going to double crochet in each stitch until we're almost to the end of this row. So we've worked into every double crochet all the way to the end here. Work a double crochet into the second to last stitch, and then just work 2 double crochet into your very last stitch. Now we're ready for row 39. So we'll start by chaining 3, just like every other row. Turn our work. Work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch. 1 and 2. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work a cluster stitch into the following stitch. And this is the start of our repeat. Chain 1, skip the following stitch, double crochet into the next stitch. And you're going to repeat that until you reach your chain 2 corner. So chain 1, skip a stitch, cluster stitch into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the next stitch, and do a double crochet into the following stitch, and just keep repeating this until we reach our corner. Now we're just working our last repeat. Chain 1, skip a stitch, work a cluster stitch into the next stitch, chain 1, skip another stitch, work a double crochet into the next stitch. And then for this corner, we're going to chain 1, work a cluster stitch into the chain 2 space, chain 2, work another cluster stitch into the chain 2 space, chain 1, and then work a double crochet into the first stitch, and then we'll work our repeat. Chain 1, skip a stitch, work a cluster stitch into the following stitch, chain 1, skip a stitch, work a double crochet into the next stitch, and simply repeat that until we're almost at the end of this row. And so we've made it to our last repeat. We're going to chain 1, skip a stitch, work a cluster stitch into the following stitch, chain 1, and then simply work 2 double crochet into the very last stitch. We will chain 3, 1, 2, 3 to start our next row and turn our work. We're going to work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch. And this row is going to be a solid double crochet row again. So we'll work a double crochet into the next stitch, a double crochet into the chain space. This is the beginning of our repeat. A double crochet into the cluster stitch, double crochet into the chain space, and then repeat. Double crochet into the double crochet, double crochet into the chain space, then the cluster, chain space, double crochet. Just keep repeating until you reach the center point of this row. So we made it to our last chain space. We'll double crochet into the last chain space, double crochet into the top of the cluster stitch, and then working into our chain 2 space, we're going to do 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. Chain 1, chain 2, 2 more double crochet, we're going to double crochet into the top of this cluster stitch, and then you're going to double crochet into the next chain space. It's a little hard to see, but it's in between this next cluster and double crochet stitch. So you want to make sure you get that space. Double crochet into the next stitch. If you miss that space, you will throw your count off, which will cause trouble in the next few rows. So just double crochet into every chain space, every cluster stitch, and every stitch until the end of this row. Alright, so we're reaching the end of the row. We're going to double crochet into the chain space, double crochet into the next stitch, and then work 2 double crochet into your very last stitch. And that finishes this row. Moving along with row 41, we are going to chain 3 and turn our work. We're going to work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch. Chain 1, skip the first stitch, and double crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then cluster stitch into the following stitch. And so that will be your repeat. Double crochet, chain 1, cluster stitch, chain 1, and we'll keep repeating that until we reach the chain 2 corner point. So we're finishing up our last repeat. We're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, work a double crochet into the following stitch, and we will chain 1, make a cluster stitch in the chain 2 space, chain 2, 1 and 2, make another cluster into the chain 2 space. Chain 1, and then we're working a double crochet into the very first stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch and work a cluster stitch into the next stitch. And this will go back to our repeat. Going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet into the following stitch. You'll repeat this until you're almost to the end of this row. So we completed the last repeat. We're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet into the following stitch, chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then work 2 double crochet into the very last stitch. And there we have our row. Moving right along, we're almost done. For row 42, we're just going to chain 3. Turn your work. We're going to work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch. My yarn is creeping up on me. We're going to double crochet into the next stitch. And we're going to double crochet in each stitch across. Will be a solid double crochet row. So double crochet into the chain space, double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet into the chain space, double crochet into the cluster stitch, and just keep repeating this until you reach the chain 2 point at the center. So we made it to our last chain space. We're going to work a double crochet into this chain space, work a double crochet into the top of the cluster stitch, and then into the chain 2 space we're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. Chain 1, chain 2, 2 more double crochet into this chain 2 space, and then double crochet into the top of this cluster stitch, double crochet into this chain space. It's kind of easy to miss, but you really want to make sure you double crochet into that, double crochet into the next stitch, and then work our repeat. Double crochet into the next space, double crochet into the cluster stitch, and just keep repeating until we reach the end of this row. So we're working into the last chain space, a double crochet. We're going to double crochet into the second to last stitch of this row, and then work 2 double crochet into the very last stitch of this row. 1 and 2. And that completes that row. Row 43, chain 1 and work a single crochet into the first stitch. Chain 3. To create our border, we're going to skip 2 stitches and work a cluster stitch into the third stitch. From here we will chain 3 more stitches, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches, and work a single crochet into the third stitch. Now we'll just repeat this until we reach the chain 2 corner. So to show you this again, we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches, and work a cluster stitch into the third stitch. 1, 2, 3 to create the cluster stitch, yarn over and pull them all together, chain another 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches and work a single crochet into the next stitch, and keep repeating that till you reach your chain 2 point. Now we'll work our last repeat. We're going to chain 3, skip 2 stitches and work a cluster stitch into the next stitch, we will chain 3 again, skip the next stitch and just work a single crochet into the chain 2 space. Alright, turning down the other side, we're going to chain 3, skip 1 stitch and work a cluster into the next stitch. Close that up, chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches and work a single crochet into the next stitch. And that is our point here. And we'll just keep working this repeat until we reach the very end of the row. So chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches, work a cluster into the third stitch, 1, 2, 3, close up our cluster stitch, chain 3, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches, single crochet in the next, and just keep repeating this all the way till the end of the row. So here we're just working our last repeat. We're just going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 2 stitches, work a cluster stitch, chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, and skip 2 stitches, which will put your last single crochet in the last stitch of the shawl, and that completes this shawl. You'll just clip this thread, weave in your 2 ends, yarn over, pull that through to fasten that off. So there is the edging of our shawl. At this point, you're not going to have very much yarn left, maybe enough to make 1 or 2 really light tassels. That is an option. But otherwise, I just really like this shawl the way it is. I don't think it's necessary to add tassels. I think it has a lot of detail on its own, but you shouldn't have very much yarn left. So there is our shawl pattern. I hope you like this tutorial. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel where I share lots of video tutorials.